Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and today we are going to be cracking on with this block and getting more stuff done. So, stay tuned. Today's episode is brought to you by you. That's right. Every single episode created on Classic Mini DIY is made with the help of our patrons and our long-term part sponsor, 7 Mini Parts. If you want to see more mini stuff and more videos in the future, please consider supporting the channel on patreon.com/Classic Mini DIY, or by checking out some of my awesome merch like t-shirts, stickers, and all sorts of other really cool stuff at merch.classicminidiy.com. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Now, like I said, we're going to be getting more done on this engine block today. And what my goal is today is to get this side wrapped up, and I'm hoping to get the cylinder head on so that we can test fit the supercharger and do some fun stuff like that. So right now we're on lockdown, and the store I normally get all my bolts from is closed, so I can't put my water pump on because I'm missing a couple bolts. So this is going to have to stay off for right now, but we're going to be able to get the timing system shut today and hopefully the head on today. Now you might remember I was waiting on a washer for this gear right here. I had one already, but I wasn't super happy with the quality and the state of it. So I got a new one. That's going to go on. Then the nut, and then of course the cover here, and then the whole cover on the side here. Now with this MED setup, you have a small oil like rubber seal right here. Now I got this cover, but I think that it was leaking here. I think that this this portion of the cover was actually leaking, and so what I'm going to be doing, you can see that kind of pops out. It might have popped out, but I am also going to add a super light coating of gasket sealer on this. I am just not totally convinced that it's making a complete tight seal. So to avoid any leaks and any frustration in the future, I'm definitely going to put that on while I try and keep that in place. That's all going to be fun. So the special washer I was talking about is this one. You can see there's a small lock tab in it. That goes in right there. Then we're going to take our nut, tighten that down here. Next, we're going to install our blast shield here. Notice it has an F on it. That means front. So if you have it backwards, the F is going to look wrong. If you have it on the right way, the F is going to look correct. Goes in right there. All right, so now with that cover centralized and tightened down, notice I removed the pulley. We are now going to install one of the parts of the billet kit that came with the supercharger that I got. So you can see here, this is a little bit different than a normal pulley. You have your standard V-belt here, but you also have the multi-webbed belt here that is going to be driving the actual supercharger. So this single pulley is now going to be driving your water pump and alternator as well as the supercharger. So we're going to install this right back on here. All right, and with that installed, Stuart also includes a new pulley bolt and a flat washer here. Normally there's a lock tab washer that goes in here. What I'm gonna do is I'm also gonna be applying some Loctite to this just to make add a little bit of peace of mind. Well, it turns out I don't have a hex large enough to tighten that down, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove this for right now, and then we will install this bolt when the other side of the engine is connected up and tightened up. Now before we say goodbye to these Omega cylinders and set the head on here so we'll never see them again, hopefully, knock on block, let's take a minute to have a look at the cylinder head that Stuart provided for me. This is something that he spent a great deal of time on. He actually had to go through one other cylinder head that had a crack in it and ended up not being usable. So let's jump over to that and just appreciate the incredible workmanship sent over from Stuart over at VMAX S-Kart. Now for this head, Stuart put together a dual valve spring setup with slightly larger valves and a beautiful porting and polishing job done in-house by himself. This head is absolutely stupendous, and it's going to be a great complement to this engine. Now the head gasket I'm going to be using is this black head gasket, this Cometic head gasket, I think is what they're called, or composite, I can't remember. These are awesome. This is what I've always used, but I had a copper one as well. Looks like this, but from everything I'm reading and my own personal experience, this one has been considerably better and has never failed me. Now, all we got to do is install the head gasket here and then put the head on top. This doesn't have any sort of gasket sealer included on it because, well, you don't need it. It's not something that you put on in between the head and the block. Now, one thing I just noticed, these two head studs that I got drilled, while they are incredibly awesome because they don't go through to the jacket, they are just a tiny smidge off center, so not perfectly up and down. So what I'm going to do is take these two studs out and then install my head gasket, and then with that in place, now I'm going to install those head studs back in. Now sometimes if you are getting your engine done, or maybe you have it already done with 11 studs, you'll find that if those were drilled, if those were tapped, after the block was built, you might find that you actually need these two head studs out when you slide the head down on. We're going to see how well it goes on without or with them actually installed, but just keep in mind it's not totally unreasonable to have to take these two 11 stud heads out so that you can get the head on. Now we're going to go ahead and mate this beautiful cylinder head with the block here. Yeah, so I'm going to have to do that exact thing I was just mentioning. That little bit of it being off center and off true, perfectly up and down, is making it just a little difficult to actually slide that cylinder head down on here. All right, with the head in place, now we're going to bring these studs back down in there. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that on this side right here, or either side really, if the hole goes all the way down into your water jacket, to address any sort of leaking issues, things like that, ARP does recommend, and this is actually a standard procedure, applying like a Permatex gasket sealer, a high temp version, and you apply it to the threads of this, and then when you screw it down into place, it's going to seal that actual stud mounting place and prevent any fluid from passing by it. Now, one other thing that I forgot to mention and that we need to do is install our rocker assembly. Now, you have these 4 smaller studs that come with your ARP kit. These ones actually get mounted into the block. So your rocker assembly is going to slide down right on top here. And in order to install this, we got to put our push rods in. I picked up a special set of push rods. These push rods are from MED, and they are a high-strength steel push rod. Really cool stuff. And I figured I'm going to add a lot of boost, and there's going to be a lot of stress on this stuff, so why don't we add something that can handle that stress. Now these all are just going to go in whichever one of these holes. The cam is new, the lifters are new, and the push rods are new, so none of them are worn together. If you were reinstalling a head and push rods you already have, you need to keep them in the same order that they were in before because everything wore out together. Now, with those push rods out of the way, time to install something I'm super excited about. And that is my MED roller rocker set. Now, this set is a 1.5 set, So it's just a smidge over standard ratio. They consider this to be basically standard ratio. This goes on with all the rollers the right way up. Well, that was really kind of annoying to install, but there we go. It's installed now. So the next thing that we're gonna do is make sure all of these push rods are lining up. Now you'll see what I'm doing right now is loosening up the rocker assembly, because these don't come pre-adjusted or anything like that, because it's actually not sitting down all the way proper right now because the springs would be under tension. So, yeah, that's much better. Everything's coming down too. To get started, I am going to install the nuts on the rocker shaft. I want this to be completely flat already before we start torquing down the head itself. And the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and install these bolts. Now, something to mention is that the two studs that are mounted into the head itself on the ends right here, these are longer. They're all the same bolt thickness, but the two in the center need to be shorter. The two on the outer points need to be longer, because this is what the valve cover mounts into, bolts right on top of these. We're gonna get our ARP fastening lube and we're gonna torque these down to 25 foot-pounds. These are the non-head studs that are getting torqued down to that. Now with that out of the way, it's time to install the actual stud bolts, or the stud nuts. And before we do that, like with the other ones, we're adding a little bit of this assembly lubricant to make sure that the torque gets torqued down correctly. Now, in order to properly torque this down, you have to do it in a standard pattern, which you should see popping up along the bottom of the screen here shortly. Now, I'm gonna torque this down, and we are gonna go through and set them all to the appropriate torque spec. Now, adjusting your rocker shaft, no matter whether you have these roller rockers or standard rockers, is something that's way easier to do when the engine is out of the car like this, because you can very easily turn the engine over and get the valves to actuate. When one valve is fully compressed, we're gonna want to do the one that's opposite to it. We're gonna measure that tappet clearance, which is in between the little rollers here and the top of your valve. Now, there's a handy chart in the Haynes manual on how to do this, and I've covered this in videos in the past. However, I did want to mention that with roller rockers, you actually want this to be a little bit wider, the gap to be a little bit wider than with standard rockers. So on standard rockers, you actually have it down to almost 12 thou, and that is measured with a feeler gauge like this. However, with a set of roller rockers, you actually want to open this up to 16 thou. This is the recommendation that I have learned from MED for these roller rockers. These are their set of roller rockers. There are quite a few out there, but from what I understand, these are some of the best. And for example, we have valve number 1 currently at full lift. You know this is number 1 because it's on the side that has the radiator and the fan, which is considered the front of the engine. Now, this is at full lift, meaning it's fully opened, and so what we need to do is measure the clearance on the number 8 valve. There's a chart in your Haynes manual, like I mentioned, that shows this up. I've also put it in the top right corner because it can get a little confusing when you start to get into the middle ones. It's not too bad, but I am going to go ahead and set all the clearances on these. The last thing I want to mention with roller rockers specifically is that on a standard set of rockers, you can measure this by going forward and back inside inside the gap there, no problem. With roller rockers, you need to go side to side, and it's not because it's going to damage anything, but it's specifically because this roller is going to kind of munch that feeler gauge, and it might give you an incorrect reading. So it's important that you go side to side on these instead of forward and back. Pretty simple stuff. I'm not going to time lapse through this because it's really tedious. It's not very exciting, but the main idea is that valve number 1 opens all the way up. adjust valve number 8, and then valve number 7 opens up. I'm not sure if this is the order they go in, but valve number 7 being all the way open means that you adjust number 2. Pretty straightforward. All right, so there's only 2 things left that we're gonna do on this episode. We are going to get this gearbox onto the actual engine block. That is step 1. Once we get that on, I would really like to mock up the supercharger and the exhaust, see what everything looks like, so we get an idea of what it's all gonna look like when it's finished and put back together. Now the seal I'm talking about is this half moon seal right here. Now one thing that I am doing different on this episode than I have in the past is for this half moon seal, this is a rigid half moon seal. They make a soft one at Mini Spares as well, and I don't like that. I don't like it at all. After having seen and used this one and test fit it just like this, there's no way I'm ever going to be going back to one of the soft ones. These hard seals were originally made so that you could switch them out while the engine was in situ. However, if you can install them at the beginning, you are going to be in great shape and it's going to work out for you much easier. Now this half moon seal is going to get a nice helping of gasket sealer, and then we're also going to put our gasket on the engine block first, and then we're going to actually take this, flip it upside down, because this is quite a bit lighter than the engine itself. So we'll take this and lower it onto the engine. The engine surface is also ready, so let's get some gasket sealer, put it on there, and of course the cork gaskets themselves, and then let's put this on there. All right, so the gearbox is on the car now. That's pretty exciting stuff. Everything is sandwiching down really nicely. The crank still spins over perfectly. One thing I did not mention while I was doing this is that I've already set my idler gear in float. This is something I didn't cover in this because I do have another video that covers this in detail already. That'll be popping up in the corner. Idler gear is not sitting on there right now, nor is my primary gear. I'm gonna install those when I do the whole transfer case side, and that'll all get done at the same time. Now the last thing I want to do in this episode is mock up the supercharger, and this is really just for my own personal benefit. I'm just super excited to see what this looks like on the car, so I won't keep you guys waiting anymore. Let's go ahead and put the supercharger on. And there it is, ladies and gents. The supercharger is sitting on the back of the head now. We've got my ceramic coated exhaust back here, and this thing is really starting to come together. I'm going to bring you guys around the engine here real quick. So right there you have an idea of what this is going to look like from the front side of the car. Obviously all of your spark plugs here, and the valve cover needs to go on. Let's go ahead and set that valve cover on just so you guys can get a picture of what the finished product is going to look like. A sneak peek, if you will. Need to trim down that valve cover gasket there for the 11 studs. And wow. So that's kind of a good idea of what it's going to look like. Little DSN bit sitting on over here. And honestly, I can't be happier with the way that this looks. Let me know what you guys think. Do you like how the engine is turning out so far? I know that this blue isn't to everybody's taste, but it is definitely to mine, so happy about that. Now, that's going to wrap up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. We got, again, a ton of stuff done. Gearbox is back on, head is back on, everything is really starting to come together. If you have any questions about what I did in this episode, feel free to post them in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer all those questions, but that's pretty much it for this episode. So, until the next one, and until I see you guys again, enjoy those minis, and motor on.